Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Today we are doing a continuation of my series where I go in depth on what I think each team should do with their first round draft pick. And in this particular video, I am going to be talking about the Hornets of Charlotte. The Charlotte Hornets are in a interesting position as a team that a lot of people thought were going to be, if not the worst, one of the bottom three teams in the NBA last year, and they ended up finishing 10th. Actually, I think they passed the Wizards because of the Wizards' horrid play in the bubble. So they finished 9th in the Eastern Conference, which obviously it's the East, so it's the weaker of the two conferences. But that's still a respectable finish. I think that James Borrego did an excellent job in getting this team to compete, and I do think that there are some pieces here that can be solid role players moving forward in guys like PJ Washington, Devontae Graham, Terry Rozier. However, there's just not that centerpiece star that they have to build around. Devontae Graham showed that he can be a really nice player as a guy who can shoot, has a little bit of playmaking talent. Obviously, once he gets inside the arc, there's not a whole lot going on because he was one of the worst players in the mid-range as well as at the rim this year, but the three-point shooting and playmaking ability make him a solid enough starting level point guard. However, he's not that star that you're building around, so that's really what this team needs to be looking for in this year's draft, that star player. Another one of the guys they have as one of their young players who can eventually grow into a guy who can be a role player on a championship level team is Miles Bridges. Well, I guess two other guys are Miles Bridges and PJ Washington. Bridges has played a lot of three the past couple of years, but I really view him as more of a four in the NBA. PJ Washington is also a four. So those are two of probably your core four young players, in my opinion, are both fours. So I do think that is a bit of a problem, and I do think that Miles Bridges is not nearly as good as he's obviously nearly as good, but he's older than PJ Washington, and he's maybe an inferior player already. So I think that I would like to move on from Miles Bridges and try to really go star hunting and try to find that guy that I can trigger my rebuild around. So in my opinion, the Hornets should look to move up in this draft. I think that LaMelo Ball is the best player in the draft, and although he is in overlap at the point guard position with Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier, Devontae Graham is an expiring contract this offseason, and next offseason, and I think he's going to get paid. So I think that he's another guy that this team should really look to move off of. And I would suggest moving him in the third pick for number one, but I just think that that's underselling on Devontae Graham, and I think you can get something better than a two-spot move up for him. So I would recommend that they trade Miles Bridges in the third pick for the first overall pick so that they have their pick of the litter on who they want to take in the draft. If I were to do that and I was the Hornets, I would select LaMelo Ball number one overall because I think that he is clearly the best player in the draft and the player that is most likely to become a foundational guy for your team and a guy that you can build around. I would love to take the chance on LaMelo and hope that he develops, especially as the Hornets, who are just looking for their guy, because really they haven't had it. Kemba was an all-star, but he was never a foundational guy. He was never a guy who could take you to that next level. And I don't know if LaMelo is, but I sure think there's a better chance that he's that guy than Miles Bridges. So I think that Miles Bridges is a small price to give up to take that chance on LaMelo. And I love the idea of that for the Hornets. However, if they think that there's red flags with LaMelo and they do trade up to one, James Wiseman is the clear guy for them to take there. Wiseman has potential to become a defensive centerpiece for a team moving forward, and I do think that one day he will be an all-defense level player. On offense, right now he's mostly just a rim runner, but that's still kind of an upgrade over what they have right now in guys like Cody Zeller. Zeller is a fine NBA player, and he could be a solid bench guy on a really good team, but he's not going to be a starting he's not going to be a starting player. He's not going to be a starting center on a playoff team. So I would look to upgrade there. And if you can draft James Wiseman, I think that's great. I wouldn't take him over LaMelo because I think that he is not as good as LaMelo, and I would rank him as the second best player in the draft. But I do think that they would at least consider it because of his fit with the roster. He could be a guy who could catch lobs from Devontae Graham and Terry Rozier. He could be that defensive centerpiece because this team really does actually have some fun players on the offensive end of the floor. Like I said before, Graham has potential as a shooter and playmaker. Terry Rozier has been a solid shooter from the perimeter and a guy who can get to the rim a bit better than Devontae Graham can. PJ Washington has shown that he has the potential to be an excellent three-point shooter. Malik Monk has shown flashes of being a solid offensive player in the NBA. So I do think that if you can just add a guy to be your defensive anchor, that could be very nice as well. Like I said, wouldn't take him over LaMelo, but James Wiseman is another really good option for them. And I think that LaMelo and Wiseman are pretty likely to go 1 and 2 in this draft. I wouldn't necessarily say to Minnesota and Golden State because I don't know for sure that those two teams are going to be hanging on to those picks. But if they are trading down, if the Warriors and Timberwolves are trading down, I really think that the Hornets should look to take advantage of that and move up to get their guy, whether it's LaMelo or James Wiseman. After that, if they do stay at 3, obviously you hope that LaMelo falls, you hope that Wiseman falls, but if neither of them do, I would rather trade down and trade out of the pick than hang on to the third pick and take someone else like Anthony Edwards, Denny Avdija. I'm going to say that name right now, guys. Don't worry. Or Onyeka Okongwu. I would rather trade down because I think that I can get one of those guys lower or at least a player on a similar level to those guys while also getting another asset. The one team that really made sense to trade down with if you are the Hornets is the Hawks at number 6. I think that you could get Kevin Huerter in the 6th pick. The Hawks could move up and take Anthony Edwards and find that guy to pair with Trae Young moving forward due to Edwards' ability as a scorer and also his flashes of defensive potential make him a potential fit alongside Young in the backcourt and another guy that can be a future star for you, really make it one of the more exciting young backcourts in the NBA. I do think that the Hawks would have interest in Edwards, and they would have interest in moving up to 3. Huerter seems like the most likely thing to give up there because you're probably not going to want to... Well, you're not going to want to give up John Collins. If they were giving up Collins, it would likely be for the 3rd pick straight up. You probably don't want to give up Cam Reddish after he showed a pretty solid rookie NBA season as a guy who can score the ball a little bit. He had a very poor beginning of the season, but he came around towards the end and also showed defensive flashes. He looks like a guy who could be perfect alongside Trae Young, so I don't think you'd want to trade him, and I think that his value would be greater than trading from 6 to 3. I don't think you would want to give up on DeAndre Hunter after 1 year, although it wasn't a great rookie season for him. So I do think that Huerter is the most likely of their young core that they would trade in a deal like this to move up to get Anthony Edwards. So I think that this could be nice for the Hornets. They add another guy who can be a future role player in their backcourt while moving down to 6, which is a more reasonable spot to draft someone like Avdija or Okongwu or Halliburton, whoever it is that they are looking at there. I would like that trade for both sides. I don't like Anthony Edwards the most for the Hornets. I'll get into that right now. If they don't trade up and they don't trade down and LaMelo and Wiseman are off the board, I would say that they should trade down, like I said, but if they don't, Anthony Edwards would be the next guy I would draft just because of the potential that he could be an all-star one day in the future. That's what the Hornets really need to be looking for. They need to be star hunting in this draft, and Edwards has the most potential outside of Ball and Wiseman to be a really, really quality NBA player, the guy with the highest potential to be a top 20 player outside of those two. So if you're not going to trade down, take Edwards. I don't love him, and I think that there's a clear gap between the top two and him. So I don't really like this for the Hornets, but if they if he's there for them, it's not that bad. And it's a good, he fits well on their team. Maybe I'm talking myself into it. Maybe I would rather take Anthony Edwards than trade down. Okay, so a slight revision to my order, I would say trade up would be my first option so that you can draft LaMelo or Wiseman. If you don't trade up, hope LaMelo or Wiseman falls to you at 3. And if they don't, draft Edwards. Then trade down if you don't want Edwards for some reason, if you think that there's red flags there with him. Otherwise, if you don't like Edwards and you don't trade down, you could draft Denny Avdia or Onyeka Okongwu. I would think you should trade down in that case because I think those guys are going to be available later in the draft and you could add another asset. But if you really like them, maybe you do take them at 3 instead of risking it. Both of those guys could be solid fits with this team due to Avdia's ability as a playmaking forward. Rozier and Graham are both good scoring guards, so they could benefit off of having another guy who could be more of a playmaker and doesn't need the ball in his hands as much in Avdia. I have questions about the shooting, as it does everyone. That's really the biggest question mark with Avdia, as well as some of the defensive stuff, although he is a smart player, so I wouldn't put it past him becoming a pretty solid NBA defender. So he's a viable option for them at 3. But I would rather have any of the top 3 over him or the trade down to get him at a later time in the draft. Same thing with Okongwu. He would be a perfect fit, like I said before, with Wiseman as an upgrade over Cody Zeller. Really good defensive player. I think Okongwu has a chance to be stellar on that end of the floor. Not to the extent that Wiseman can be. I don't think that Okongwu has all defensive potential, but I do think that he has a chance to be an above average defensive center. And I think that there's probably potential for him to be a better offensive center than there is with Wiseman. I trust the shooting with Okongwu a bit more than I do with Wiseman. I think there's a better chance that he becomes a stretch big. I also think that Onyeka is a bit better in the post as of right now. He has a bit more post moves than Wiseman does. He's not as tall, so he's not as good of a rim runner, but I do think that he's the better offensive big. However, Wiseman's defensive potential is too much for me to take Okongwu over Wiseman. So if you're comparing the two, Wiseman's the better player. But Okongwu is a viable option for them at 3 if Wiseman's not on the board. So in summary, my options for them would be, number 1, trade up to get your favorite guy in the draft. Number 2, stay put and draft either LaMelo Ball or James Wiseman. Number 3, if you don't trade up and LaMelo and Wiseman aren't there, draft Anthony Edwards. Number 4, trade down and try to get another asset for your pick as well as a later pick in the draft. If you don't trade down, you draft Denny or you draft Okongwu. Hope that you enjoyed this video. That's it for me. Leave a like, subscribe if you enjoyed. I'm going to be cranking out lots of videos like this, going over teams and what I think they should do with their specific draft picks. Let me know what you think the Hornets should do with this pick in the comment section down below. That's it for me. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you all again very soon.